The library was silent, except for the steady hum of air conditioning and the soft rustle of pages being turned. Aria Winters sat tucked away in the farthest corner, her book spread out in front of her. A strand of hair slipped loose from her bun, brushing her cheek as she scribbled notes in the margin of a textbook. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. Ordinary was safe. Ordinary was what she had built for herself here in New York, far away from the shadows of her past. Her phone buzzed against the wooden table. She frowned. No one really called her, not anymore. When she answered, the voice that spilled through the speaker made her hand go cold. Aria Winters. It wasn't a question. The tone was deep, smooth, but edged with authority, like a command she was supposed to obey. It felt carved into her, striking something in her bones that she couldn't explain. She knew that voice. No, she didn't know it, but she recognized it. From the scattered letters her mother used to send, the name had been mentioned again and again. The man her mother had chosen after she left. Alistair Black, Aria whispered before she even realized she had spoken. There was silence for a beat, the kind of silence that thickened the air, and then his voice returned. Your mother is dead. The burial is in 2 weeks. Aria's pen slipped from her fingers, rolling off the table and onto the floor. Her chest tightened. Dead? For years her mother had been a ghost to her, drifting in and out through ink on paper, never flesh and blood. Once, when Aria was a child, her mother had been her whole world, soft lullabies, warm hands braiding her hair. But as the years passed, that warmth faded into absence, until finally, at 16, her mother had walked away completely. She had lived with her father after that. Her human father, the man who never knew the truth about her bloodline, about the wolf that stirred beneath her skin. He kept her safe, but even he was gone now. 2 years in the ground, 2 years of silence echoing through her small apartment. And now this. The voice of the man she had never met, telling her the woman she once called mother was gone forever. Aria, Alistair said, breaking through her spiraling thoughts. The way he spoke her name was unsettling, like he had been saying it for years in private. You will come home. Home. The word lodged in her throat like a stone. The moment the line went dead, Aria just sat there, the phone heavy in her hand. Her heart wasn't racing the way she thought it should. It was quiet inside her chest, too quiet, as though the world had gone still to absorb what she'd just heard. Her mother was dead. Hours later, when she finally returned to her tiny apartment, she found herself standing in front of the narrow wooden dresser she hardly used. The soft hum of the city outside pressed faintly against the windows. Horns blaring in the distance, the rhythm of footsteps on the sidewalk below. But none of it touched her. On top of the dresser stood a single photograph in a silver frame, its edges worn smooth from her fingers. She reached for it slowly, as though it might shatter beneath her touch. It was her mother, Lydia Winters. Aria stared into those storm-blue eyes, the same as hers, and felt that familiar ache unfurl inside her. Lydia had been beautiful, radiant in ways that seemed untouchable. Shiny blonde hair that spilled in waves, a smile that could have lit up every room. And yet, even in the photograph, even captured in a frozen moment, her mother's eyes carried shadows. Eyes that had always looked like a storm waiting to break. A storm Aria had inherited. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. She tried to summon the release of crying, the messy sobs she thought a daughter was supposed to give when faced with death. But instead, only a heavy weight pressed down on her chest. It was loss, not sharp, not sudden, but heavy, like an old wound reopened. She thought of her mother's last moments. Had she been alone? Had she whispered regrets to an empty room? Had the storm inside her ever calmed enough to give her peace? Aria wondered if her mother had died searching for it. Her gaze slipped to the girl in the photograph beside her, the younger version of herself, maybe 10 years old, clinging to her mother's side with a smile too wide, too eager. That little girl had once believed her mother would never let go. That little girl hadn't known that people could love you with one hand while walking away with the other. She set the picture down, fingers trembling for just a second, and then moved to her closet. The suitcase she pulled from the shelf thudded onto her bed, releasing a puff of dust. She opened it, the zipper's teeth grinding apart, and began to pack. A few jeans, some shirts, sweaters, her journal. She didn't pause to think about what she was leaving behind. It wasn't as though New York had ever felt like home. She folded everything with slow precision, her thoughts circling. Her stepfather, Alistair Black. Her mother had never written much about him. Letters that were already sparse grew vaguer after his name appeared. All Aria had was fragments, mentions of a strong man, a protector, someone who gave her mother a new life, but never more than that. It was as though her mother had wanted to shield him, or shield Aria, from the truth of who he was. Why? And why, after years of absence, was it his voice, his command that had pulled her back? The buzz of her phone broke her thoughts. She snatched it from the nightstand, a text, from him. Directions: be here by tomorrow night. Blood moon pack. Aria's heart stuttered. She stared at the words, reading them again and again. The name lingered like smoke in her mind. Blood Moon. It wasn't just a town, it was a territory. And she knew, in a way she couldn't explain, that this wasn't just about a funeral. She set the phone down slowly, a shiver threading down her spine. For the first time in years, the wolf inside her stirred, restless and curious. The hum of the engine was the only sound keeping Aria company as she left New York behind. The towering skyline faded in her rearview mirror, swallowed by the endless stretch of road that curved into the unknown. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles pale, yet her face remained unreadable. She had never been one for dramatic goodbyes, but still, leaving behind the few people she called friends made her chest feel heavier than she expected. They had hugged her, offered promises of see you soon, but even Aria knew those words didn't hold much weight. The truth was, she wasn't sure when or if she would return. Her phone sat in the cup holder, the last text glowing faintly on the screen. Blood Moon Pack. Follow the directions carefully. A.B. Aria didn't have to wonder who A.B. was. Alistair Black, her stepfather, the man she had never met but whose name carried a certain weight, even in her mother's distant letters. The GPS had led her well enough through highways and small towns, but the deeper she drove, the more useless it became. The glowing blue arrow spun in circles, confused, as though the road ahead didn't exist. Aria cursed under her breath, switching it off and unfolding the handwritten directions Alistair had sent. They looked old-fashioned, the kind of thing people used before technology became reliable. And yet, there was something oddly fitting about it. The further she went, the more civilization dissolved. Busy roads blurred into narrower paths. Streetlights disappeared until only the pale glow of her headlights lit the way. The air grew thicker, cooler, carrying an earthy scent that was strangely intoxicating. Pine, damp soil, and something else she couldn't place. Her wolf stirred. Aria gripped the wheel tighter, ignoring the shift inside her chest. She rarely acknowledged that side of herself. Growing up with her human father, she had learned to bury the instincts, the whispers, the urges that belonged to the other half of her bloodline. He never knew. Her mom never wanted it, only telling her stories and taking her places that gave her glimpses in secret, and she had made peace with keeping it that way. But now her wolf felt restless, almost awake. By the time she reached the town, the road had narrowed into a single path surrounded by towering trees. It felt as though she had driven through a portal, stepping out of the world she knew and into something entirely different. The settlement wasn't like the towns she was used to. Houses were tucked deep into the woods, built from heavy timber and stone, with smoke curling from chimneys. People walked along the dirt paths, their movements graceful, their eyes sharp. Children chased one another barefoot, their laughter echoing through the trees, and every single one of them stopped to stare at her. Aria killed the engine and stepped out, instantly aware of the way eyes followed her. Some were curious, others were openly suspicious. A few looked hostile. Heat pricked at the back of her neck. Was it because they sensed she was a half-breed? Did they smell the human blood that ran alongside the wolf in her veins? Her wolf shifted nervously inside her, but Aria forced herself to lift her chin and walk toward the largest house in sight. "Aria Winters?" The voice was warm, though raspy with age. Aria turned to find an elderly woman making her way toward her. She was small, hunched slightly, her hair pure white, braided neatly down her back. Her eyes, however, were sharp and alive, assessing Aria with surprising intensity. "Yes," Aria replied cautiously. The woman's expression softened. "My, you look just like your mother. Same eyes, same smile." Aria froze, unsure how to respond. Compliments about her mother always felt like someone poking at an old wound. The woman extended a hand. "I'm Maggie. Been part of Blood Moon Pack longer than I care to count. Come, child, you must be tired." Aria hesitated only a moment before following. Maggie's presence was oddly comforting, like an anchor in unfamiliar waters. She led Aria into the main house, a sprawling building of dark wood and stone, its interior lit by soft golden light, the smell of burning firewood and herbs wrapped around her like a blanket. Maggie guided her up a staircase and into a quiet room overlooking the woods. The bed was neatly made, a small desk sat in the corner, and a window stretched open to let the cool air in. "This will be your room," Maggie said kindly. "Alpha Alistair is in a meeting, but he'll be with you soon." The word Alpha struck Aria harder than she expected. She paused, turning slowly to the old woman. "Alistair is the Alpha?" Maggie's brows lifted in mild surprise. "Of course. Did you not know?" Aria shook her head, her pulse skipping. Her wolf stirred violently, a sudden heat rushing through her veins at the mere mention of his name. It scared her, it confused her, and it made her heart beat far too fast. She forced a smile, thanking Maggie, but once the door closed and she was alone, Aria pressed a hand to her chest. Her wolf was pacing inside her, restless and alert, as though the very air around her had changed. The room felt too quiet, too perfect. The walls were carved from thick timber, polished smooth by time, the kind of wood that carried whispers of generations who had walked through these halls. Aria sat on the edge of her bed, her gaze fixed on the window. Beyond it, the forest stretched endlessly, dark and alive, the moonlight painting silver paths between the trees. For the first time in years, she felt the hum of belonging somewhere deeper than the city, though she wasn't sure if she wanted to belong. With a soft exhale, she stood and left the room. Her footsteps echoed faintly against the wooden floor as she wandered down the hall, her fingers brushing along the railings, polished by hundreds of hands before hers. Everything about the house felt rooted in history. Like every beam, every stone, had been built with blood and sacrifice. The further she walked, the heavier the silence grew. Conversations hushed as she passed. Glances lingered too long, too sharp, as if her presence itself was an intrusion. The members of the pack weren't cruel, but their stares spoke volumes. They hadn't welcomed her, not yet. Still, she lifted her chin, choosing curiosity over fear. Aria's steps carried her into the library. The scent of parchment, leather, and dust wrapped around her instantly, comforting in its own strange way. The shelves rose impossibly high, ladders sliding along the rows, the collection vast enough to rival any New York archive. Her fingers trailed over spines as she walked the aisles. Some titles were written in languages she didn't recognize. Others hummed with something ancient, a faint power that made her wolf stir uneasily. Pulling out a smaller book, she sank into a leather chair by the window, losing herself for a while in the faded ink of old stories. For a brief moment, the world outside fell away, the stares, the whispers, the grief she carried for her mother. But eventually, the light dimmed. Night crept in, swallowing the edges of the town. Aria closed the book, her chest heavier than before. When she returned to her room, the house was quieter, almost reverent, as though it too rested under the weight of the moon. She showered, letting the hot water soothe the knots in her muscles. Droplets clung to her skin as she pulled on a simple shirt and shorts, her damp hair falling in waves down her back. Exhaustion tugged at her, but her mind refused peace. She thought of her mother, her stormy blue eyes, her shining blonde hair, her presence both warm and distant. Aria wondered if she would dream of her tonight, or if the emptiness would follow her even in sleep.
The council chamber was tense. The air smelled of sweat, iron, and faint smoke, the remnants of warriors who had returned battered but alive. Around the long wooden table his men spoke in clipped tones, voices overlapping as they recounted the attack. The Crescent Pack. They hadn't claimed responsibility, but who else lingered close enough to strike with such precision? Crescent wolves had always been restless, hungry for land that wasn't theirs. Alistair leaned back in his chair, broad shoulders stiff, his hazel eyes narrowing as he listened. His jaw was tight, his patience thin. He wasn't a man who wasted words. He absorbed, calculated, weighed every possibility like a blade in his hand. And yet, right in the middle of his beta's report, he froze. Something stirred inside him. His wolf shifted, restless and impatient, clawing at the edges of his control. The sound of voices dulled, fading beneath the sudden rush of a scent that coiled through him like smoke. Sweet, pure, comforting in a way that unsettled him. His chest rose sharply as the scent thickened. His wolf growled low inside him, vibrating against his ribs. Mine. The word tore through him, raw and feral, startling him enough to grip the armrest of his chair until the wood cracked beneath his fingers. Not now. Not possible. Alistair. A soft voice at his side pulled him back. He turned his head to find Janelle, his right hand beautiful, elegant, her dark eyes filled with concern. "She's here," she said quietly. "Lydia Winter's daughter has arrived." His body went still. For a long moment he only stared at her, then shook his head slowly. "No," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "It can't be." Janelle tilted her head as if trying to read the flicker of conflict in his eyes. But he dismissed her with a wave of his hand, rising to his full height. The meeting continued, voices buzzing around him, but he barely heard them. He forced himself through the last of it, giving his orders with precision, his voice steady even as the wolf inside him raged. When the chamber finally emptied and silence reclaimed the room, Alistair exhaled, dragging a hand over his face. He had lived long enough, fought hard enough to know that fate often chose the cruelest moments to strike. And now, this. He walked through the hallways with measured steps, though every nerve in his body was on fire. The closer he came to the guest wing, the stronger the scent grew, sweet, intoxicating, dizzying. It wrapped around him, tugged at him, made his wolf claw at his insides with unrelenting need. By the time he reached her door, he had to pause. His chest rose and fell heavily, his fists tight at his sides. For a man who commanded hundreds, who had faced blood and war without flinching, the thought of knocking on this door nearly unsteadied him. But he did it. A single, deliberate knock. The door opened, and the air left his lungs. She stood there, delicate yet strong, with stormy blue eyes that mirrored a past he thought buried. Her damp hair clung to her shoulders, her face still flushed from the shower, her scent so close now it nearly drowned him. The wolf inside him roared. Mine. The sound of it echoed in his head, primal, unyielding. He clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He had expected a girl, fragile, uncertain. But standing before him was a woman, one who carried sadness like a crown and innocence like fire. She stared at him, wide-eyed, silent. For a split second, the absurdity of it nearly made him laugh. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. But he held himself steady. No smile, no laugh. Only control. Always control.
Aria's breath hitched before she could stop it. Her body went rigid, her pulse hammering as her wolf stirred in recognition she couldn't explain. She was staring, shamelessly staring, and couldn't tear her eyes away. It was him who broke the spell. Alistair cleared his throat, the low sound pulling her back to herself. Aria's cheeks flamed with heat, embarrassment rushing through her veins. She blinked quickly, forcing her eyes away, gripping the doorknob tighter than necessary. "May I come in?" His voice was deep, steady, controlled in a way that made her think nothing about this man ever slipped by accident. "Yes," she said too quickly, her voice catching. "Of course." The words felt innocent, polite, but the moment they left her lips, she felt a strange weight in them, like she had agreed to something more. Alistair stepped inside. The room seemed smaller instantly, the air heavier with his presence. He didn't sit, didn't relax, only stood with that straight, commanding posture that told her without words who he was. "I should have come sooner," he said, his tone brisk, measured. "Forgive me. The day was heavy with matters that couldn't wait, but I didn't want to end it without coming to you." Aria swallowed, nodding quietly, her sadness settling deeper into her chest. His gaze softened by a fraction, barely, but his words carried a weight that pressed against her heart. "I am sorry about your mother. She deserves more than words, but for now, they are all I can offer." Aria's lips parted, but no sound came. She only nodded again, afraid her voice would betray her. A pause hung between them, long enough for her to hear the thud of her own heartbeat. Then Alistair spoke again. "Have you eaten?" "Yes," she said softly. He nodded once, sharply, as though her answer mattered more than it should. His words came clipped, serious, every syllable intentional. She noticed how he didn't waste anything. Not words, not looks. His eyes were intense, steady, like they could burn through anything if he wanted to. Finally, he shifted, his voice lower. "The burial will be tomorrow at the underground grove. It is sacred ground." He turned, ready to leave, and something inside her panicked at the thought of him walking out so soon. "Wait," she said, the word breaking the stillness. He stopped. His back was broad, his presence filling the room even as he stood at the door. Slowly, he turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. Was she happy here? Aria's voice was fragile, trembling. "My mom, did she find peace?" For a moment he didn't answer, his gaze fixed on hers, deep and unreadable, the silence stretching long enough to make her chest ache. Then, finally, he spoke. "She found home here," he said, his tone heavy with truth. "And she spoke of you, sometimes." The words struck harder than she expected. Something inside her cracked open. Alistair's eyes lingered on her for a beat longer, then he turned and left, his footsteps fading into the hall. The door clicked shut, and the silence rushed back in. Aria sat down on the edge of her bed. The weight she had been carrying all day, quiet, controlled, locked tight inside, broke loose. Her tears came quietly at first, rolling hot down her cheeks, catching on her lips, but then they deepened, heavy and choking, the kind of sobs she hadn't let herself release in years. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling as the grief she had fought so hard to hold back finally claimed her. For the first time since the call, since the voice of Alistair Black had shattered her fragile normal, Aria allowed herself to mourn. Aria stood in front of the small dresser, her hands resting on the worn edge, as if the wood itself could steady her. The air felt heavy, thick with silence. Tomorrow, she would bury her mother. Her mother. The word curled strangely in her chest, like it belonged to someone else's mouth, not hers. She knew the face, she knew the name. But the woman she was supposed to mourn was more a shadow than a presence. And yet, the ache inside her told her that grief didn't always need years of memories to exist. It could bloom out of absence, out of the emptiness of what should have been. Aria pulled out a simple black t-shirt and slipped it over her head, smoothing it down against her skin. Then she reached for her black skinny jeans, tugging them up with quiet, practiced movements. Nothing fancy, no dress, no jewelry. She didn't feel like putting on someone else's idea of grief. This was hers, raw, uneven, strange. She stared at herself in the small, cracked mirror. A young woman with tired eyes stared back, not fragile. No, she had been fighting her battles long before this day came. Long before this town, this pack, or this alpha with eyes too intense for her own good. She had learned to stand on broken ground, and she would do it again. Her thoughts betrayed her, though. Against her will, his face rose in her mind. Alistair Black. That name alone carried weight, like thunder before a storm. She thought of his presence, the broad shoulders, the long black hair pulled back in that careless bun, the hazel eyes that had looked at her as if he could see right past her walls. A man who looked carved out of both beauty and rough edges, and the way his voice had filled her small room, steady, precise, as if he was used to giving commands and having them obeyed. Her cheeks warmed at the memory of how she had stared, how he had caught her, how he had cleared his throat to pull her back from openly admiring him. She hated herself for it, for that flutter in her chest, for the way his voice replayed in her head like an echo she couldn't shut off. She had an idea what it meant, and it terrified her. Her wolf shifted inside her, restless, as if confirming her suspicion. No, she thought fiercely. She didn't want this. She didn't want anything tying her to this place, not bonds, not men with haunted eyes, not even the memory of a mother who had called these woods home. She would bury Lydia Winters. She would say goodbye to the woman she had barely known, the woman who had still managed to love her from a distance. And then she would leave, back to New York, back to noise and strangers and lights that never dimmed, back to the life she understood. At the thought, her wolf stirred again, pushing against her chest. The animal inside her didn't like the idea of leaving. It didn't like the thought of walking away from something, someone, it had already begun to claim. Aria gripped the dresser harder, knuckles white, heart pounding in her ribs. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, trying to calm the storm inside. No, she whispered to herself. Whatever this is, I don't care. I'll bury her. I'll wrap this up, and I'll go. But deep inside, her wolf growled in quiet protest, as if mocking her words. Aria woke with a sharp jerk, her breath tearing out of her lungs as though she had been drowning in sleep. The room was dark, the first fingers of dawn just creeping past the curtains. Her body was slick with sweat, her skin fever-hot, her heart hammering in her chest. It wasn't her mother this time. No fleeting, half-smiling face that vanished before she could reach for it. No ghosts of words never spoken. No, this dream had belonged to him. Alistair. Even whispering his name in her mind sent a tremor through her. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the images away, but they burned behind her lids. His strong hands trailing fire along her bare skin, his mouth close to her ear, whispering words that curled around her spine like smoke. His voice had been rough, low, promising things that made her body ache in ways she'd never allowed herself to feel before. And she had wanted it. God, she had wanted it. A small, horrified gasp escaped her lips as she sat up straighter, clutching at the sheets. Heat spread between her thighs, proof of the dream's cruel reality. Shame washed over her in waves, thick and suffocating. She pressed her palms against her face, shaking her head as if she could knock the thoughts loose. How could her mind betray her like this? On this day of all days. Today, she bury her mom, say goodbye for the first and last time. She rose from the bed slowly, quietly, moving like someone walking through a church. Her hands shook as she reached for clothes. She chose black again, of course, a loose shirt, black jeans, shoes that could carry her through dirt and stone. No effort, no glamour. This day wasn't about appearances, it was about endings. By the time she stepped out of the house, the world was hushed. The sky had softened to pale gray, and the air carried the scent of earth and pine, damp from the night's rain. A stillness seemed to cover everything, as if even nature bowed its head. The underground grove lay beyond the heart of the pack's land. She had never been there before, but somehow her feet knew the way. The path wound between tall trees, their branches arching overhead like cathedral ceilings. The silence pressed closer with every step. When she arrived, the sight pulled the breath from her lungs. It wasn't a graveyard of sorrow. It was sacred. Lanterns hung low, swaying in the breeze, their golden glow kissing the moss-covered stones. Wildflowers grew in careful patches, colors soft against the dark earth. The air was cool, damp, carrying a reverence that seeped into her bones. And there, at the center, lay her mother's resting place. Aria's knees nearly buckled as the truth hit her. Her mother was gone. Completely, forever gone. No chance of another meeting, no chance to ask why, to scream at her for leaving, to cling to her like a child who had been waiting too long. She swallowed hard, forcing her chin up, her eyes burning. People had gathered quietly, the pack members standing in clusters. They didn't stare. They didn't whisper. They bowed their heads in respect. That, more than anything, told her who her mother had been here. Respected. Loved. Honored. Aria's chest ached. A few offered murmured condolences as she passed, soft words and bowed heads. She nodded politely, but her voice refused to work. The weight of grief lodged in her throat like a stone. And then, him. Alistair stood a few paces away, a dark pillar against the soft light of the grove. His black shirt stretched across his shoulders, the sleeves rolled just enough to show the edge of ink curling up his arm. His hair was tied back, but loose strands fell across his face. Hazel eyes found hers, steady and unrelenting. He said nothing. He simply stepped closer, standing beside her like a wall, solid and immovable. His presence wrapped around her without touch, a strange kind of comfort she hadn't asked for but couldn't push away. They stood like that for what felt like hours, the silence between them speaking louder than words ever could. She didn't look at him, not directly, but she felt him, the warmth, the weight, the strange pull that scared her more than the grave in front of her. As the burial rites began, Aria's heart cracked open. She watched the earth take her mother back, watched the finality of it, and tears slipped down her cheeks in silence. And still Alistair stood there, not speaking, not moving, saying nothing, yet saying everything. It had been 3 days since the burial, 3 days since the earth swallowed the last piece of her mother. Aria hadn't cried again, not in the way she had that night when Alistair left her room. Instead, a quiet numbness had settled over her, an almost unbearable stillness that she carried around like a cloak. She spent her days wandering the pack grounds, memorizing faces, learning paths that twisted deep into the woods. People nodded politely when she passed, but their smiles never reached their eyes. They looked at her like she was something in between, neither stranger nor kin, like they hadn't yet decided if she belonged. And maybe she didn't. Every night she thought of New York, the noise, the lights, the anonymity. She longed for it, the place where no one looked at her like she was half of something, incomplete. She had already decided she would leave. quietly, without fuss. She owed no one here anything, not even Alistair. That evening the library drew her in again. There was something about the room, the scent of aged paper, the tall shelves heavy with books, that calmed her. The house itself felt alive with history, its walls whispering secrets. But the library was the one place that welcomed her in silence. She had just traced her fingers across the spine of an old leather-bound book when a soft voice broke the quiet. "Couldn't sleep?" Aria turned. Maggie stood by the doorway, holding a tray with 2 cups of steaming tea. The older woman always seemed to know when Aria needed company and when she didn't. Tonight, she crossed the room without waiting for an answer, setting the tray down on a side table. "I thought you might like something warm," Maggie said gently, her eyes kind but sharp, as though they saw more than Aria ever said aloud. Aria nodded, offering a small smile before sinking into one of the armchairs. She wrapped her hands around the cup Maggie handed her, letting the warmth bleed into her fingers. For a long time, they sipped in silence, the crackle of the fireplace filling the space between them. Finally, Aria spoke, her voice quiet. "What was she like here? My mom, I mean." Maggie's eyes softened. Lydia was light, strong but gentle in a way that drew people to her. She found a home here when she didn't expect to, and she gave that home back to others. Aria's throat tightened. She pictured her mother's smile in the photographs, the letters that had carried more love than explanation. "Did she ever talk about me?" she asked, the words scraping against the lump in her throat. Maggie reached across the space, brushing Aria's hand lightly. "She did. Not as often as you might think. Lydia was private with her grief. But when she did, her eyes would soften. You were her unfinished story, Aria, the part she always held close." Aria blinked hard, tears stinging her lashes. She looked down at her tea, watching the steam twist upward like smoke. For a moment, she thought the conversation would end there, but the silence pressed on her chest, urging her to say the words that had been clawing at her for days. "Maggie," she began, hesitant, "can I ask you something else? Something strange." The older woman tilted her head, patient. "Go on." Aria's fingers tightened around the cup. "I feel something around Alistair." Even saying his name made her pulse quicken. "It's hard to explain. It's like this pull, like my body recognizes him even when my mind doesn't want to. And I don't understand it. I know about mate bonds. I've heard the stories. But," she trailed off, shame flooding her face. "But he belonged to your mother?" Maggie finished softly, her voice not unkind. Aria swallowed hard, looking away. "Yes," the word scraped against her tongue. "And it scares me. Because I don't want to be tied here. I don't want anything keeping me from walking away. And yet..." Her hand trembled around the cup. "Yet I can't ignore it." Hi. The fire popped in the hearth, sharp and loud in the quiet room. Maggie studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed, leaning back in her chair. "The bond between wolves is not something we choose, Aria. It is older than blood, older than vows. Sometimes it makes sense, and sometimes it feels like a cruel twist of fate." Aria's chest clenched. Maggie's gaze softened. "But it is never meaningless. Whatever you are feeling, there is truth in it, even if it terrifies you." Aria's lips parted, but no words came. The weight of Maggie's answer settled over her like a storm. She stared into the fire, her heart pounding, and for the first time, she admitted the truth to herself. She wasn't just afraid of the bond. She was afraid of how much she already wanted it. The next day, the forest was quieter than she expected. Aria wandered deeper into the trees, her sneakers crunching over fallen leaves and damp soil. She breathed in the earthy scent, letting it settle into her chest. There was something grounding about being out here, surrounded by ancient trunks and whispering winds. For the first time in days, she felt like she could almost breathe freely. But then, it shifted. The air grew heavier. Her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, a prickling down her spine making her pause. She turned her head slowly, scanning the thickets. That's when they came. Two massive brown wolves launched from the shadows with snarls that split the silence. Aria barely had time to scream before the first one crashed into her, knocking her onto the damp earth. Claws scraped against her arms as she kicked wildly, trying to push it off. Her cry echoed through the trees as sharp teeth grazed her ribs. Fire ripped through her side, pain so sharp it stole her breath. She clawed at the ground, at the beast above her, her throat raw from screaming. But she was no match. Her human body couldn't keep up with their strength, their speed. The second wolf circled, snapping its jaws, waiting for its turn. Her chest heaved. Panic surged. I'm going to die here. But then the air shifted again. A roar, deep, guttural, furious, ripped through the woods. From the shadows burst a massive black wolf, its fur glistening like night itself. Power radiated from it, terrifying and mesmerizing all at once. Beside it, an ashy gray wolf moved with equal ferocity, both tearing into the brown wolves with lethal precision. The fight was brutal, raw. Teeth against flesh, snarls cutting through the silence, the crack of bones. One of the brown wolves let out a strangled cry before collapsing, lifeless. The other fought desperately, but was forced down, pinned, captured. Aria lay trembling on the ground, her side burning with pain. Her breath came in shallow gasps as her wide eyes tracked the black wolf. The creature turned toward her. For a moment, she froze. And then, before her eyes, the massive beast padded toward a tall oak, disappearing behind it. And from the shadows stepped out a man. Her heart lurched. Alistair, bare-chested, only a pair of black slacks clinging to his hips, his skin slick with sweat, his long, dark hair loose from its tie and falling across his shoulders. Hazel eyes burned with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. He was breathtaking, terrifying, beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. And in that instant, she knew the black wolf was him. Aria. His voice was sharp, cutting through her daze. He crouched in front of her, his expression tight with worry. Are you hurt? She opened her mouth, but only a shaky breath escaped. Her hand pressed against her ribs, warm blood seeping through her fingers. Alistair's gaze dropped to the wound, his jaw tightening. In one swift motion, he scooped her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing. The heat of his bare skin against her was overwhelming, but his grip was steady, protective. You're safe now, he muttered, almost like a vow and prayer.
Alistair couldn't breathe without seeing it again. The blood on her shirt, the way her body had gone limp in his arms. The copper scent of her pain had driven him into a rage so deep, he almost lost himself to the wolf. For 2 days, it hadn't left him. He'd paced, prowled, snapped at his men until they left him alone. His wolf snarled inside him, restless and furious, demanding blood, demanding vengeance. And though they'd found the truth, that it hadn't been the Crescent Pack at all, only rogues who had slipped too close to their borders, Alistair couldn't shake the fury. How had this happened? How had they gotten so close to her? He slammed his fist against the desk in his office, the wood groaning under the impact. The paper scattered, but he didn't care. His chest heaved, his jaw tight, his hazel eyes dark with fire. He had seen battles. He had buried pack members. But nothing had ever undone him like the sight of Aria crumpled and bleeding in the dirt. And he knew why. The truth had clawed its way out of denial that night in the woods. The moment she gasped beneath him, the moment her scent, wild and soft and maddening, filled his lungs, his wolf had roared a single word that shattered everything. Mine. He had fought it. God, he had fought it. Because fate was cruel. Because the girl fate had bound him to was the daughter of the woman he had once loved. Her mother, Lydia. A memory flashed. Lydia's bright laugh, her blue eyes, the way she had once clung to him in the dark before illness took her strength. He had cared for her, yes, protected her, even loved her in a way, but never like this. Never with the bone-deep hunger that hollowed him out every time Aria walked into a room. He dragged a hand through his hair, pulling hard at the strands, trying to ground himself. The wolf inside him prowled, restless, furious, aching to be near her again. He couldn't keep it from her much longer. She had to know about what they were, about the bond that tied them together whether they wanted it or not, about the danger that came with being his. If he waited too long, if something else happened before she understood, it would destroy them both. Alistair exhaled shakily, staring at the door that led to the infirmary where she was resting. His chest tightened with something sharp, something he refused to name. But he knew one thing. It was time. He would tell her the truth. About the wolves. About the bond. About what fate had done to them. Even if it shattered the fragile distance she was clinging to. Even if she hated him for it. Because the thought of losing her again? He wouldn't survive it.
It had been a week since the attack. The wound at her ribs had healed almost completely, though sometimes when she pressed her hand against it, she swore she could still feel phantom pain, a reminder of just how close she had come. But that wasn't what kept her awake at night. It was the dreams. Night after night, they came. Not of her mother, not of the pack, but of him, Alistair. Sometimes it was his wolf, massive, black as midnight, eyes burning into hers as though he could see straight through her. Sometimes it was his human form, rough, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. His hands always found her in those dreams, strong, unyielding, claiming her as though she belonged nowhere else. His voice was always low, heated, whispering things she couldn't repeat in daylight. And she always woke trembling, her skin damp with sweat, her body betraying her with a desperate ache that terrified her. This couldn't go on. Aria sat on the edge of her bed, her suitcase open on the floor beside her. She had folded clothes inside, neatly, as though order would make the decision easier. It didn't. I have to leave. The thought pressed into her like a blade. Everything here was too complicated, too deep. She wasn't a fragile girl, but this was a war she wasn't prepared to fight. Whatever this pull was between her and Alistair, it wasn't natural. It couldn't be. And she refused to let it trap her here. Her 21st birthday was 2 weeks away, a milestone in wolf years, something she knew carried weight, though she had never embraced that side of herself. She didn't want to be here when it came, didn't want to discover what it meant under his gaze, under the weight of this bond she didn't understand. No, she would leave before then, but not without facing him. Aria closed her eyes, exhaling through her nose. She had never been one to run from her feelings, even when they threatened to crush her. If she was going to leave, she would leave with words spoken, not swallowed. She would confront him, tell him plainly. Whatever this was, it could never make sense between them. She repeated it in her mind, like armor. Never. It could never be. As if fate were listening, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached for it, her stomach twisting when she saw his name. Alistair. Her pulse quickened as she opened the message. Meet me in the grove, tomorrow night. That was all. No explanation, no warmth, just direct, precise, like the man himself. Still, her breath caught in her chest. The grove, the same place where they had laid her mother to rest. She stared at the screen long after the message had gone cold, her heart thundering with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite hope. Tomorrow night, then. Whatever this was between them, whatever had been burning at the edges of her dreams and gnawing at her waking thoughts, it would be faced, and maybe, finally, ended. Aria had prepared, not really knowing why, but something inside her told her this night would change everything. She stood in front of the mirror, folds of her white flowery dress.